A billionaire businessman dedicates his life to work after losing his wife to cancer. While he ignores his sick son, a poor girl appears in hospital, bringing light to his dark days. But everything changes when he realizes that her face bears the features of the woman he loved and lost. And in this unlikely encounter, he discovers that the greatest wealth is the family that is reborn even in pain. Watch this beautiful story of overcoming to the end. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The Manhattan skyline glittered like a jewel case against the pre-dawn sky as William Montgomery stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. At 52, he commanded an empire that had reshaped New York's architectural identity. Montgomery Developments wasn't just a company, it was the company that mayors, governors, and business tycoons called when they wanted something impossible built. The Shanghai deal needs your signature, Mr. Montgomery. His assistant, Vanessa, placed a stack of papers on his desk, her voice barely disturbing the silence. Will nodded without turning from the window. The board meeting? Scheduled for 9. Your cousin Richard has requested additional time to discuss the Brooklyn waterfront project. A muscle twitched in Will's jaw. Richard had been pushing for riskier investments lately, challenging Will's authority in subtle ways that were becoming less subtle by the week. Fine. Anything else? Will finally turned, his reflection in the glass revealing a man whose tailored suit couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into his face. Dr. Anderson called. Ethan had a difficult night. The mention of his son's name changed something in Will's posture, a stiffening, a barely perceptible retreat. I'll stop by the hospital after the board meeting. Vanessa hesitated. It's his birthday, sir. Will froze, his hand halfway to his coffee cup. How could he have forgotten? 10 years ago today, Sarah had given him the greatest gift of his life. And 5 years ago, when Sarah was already gone, they had received the diagnosis that had changed everything. Have flowers sent to his room, and that new gaming system he mentioned. Already done, sir, Vanessa said quietly, but Dr. Anderson thought your presence might be. I said I'll stop by after the meeting. Will's tone ended the conversation. 40 blocks away, in the pediatric oncology ward of New York Presbyterian Hospital, Ethan Montgomery opened his eyes to another day of beeping machines and antiseptic smells. His room, a private suite that cost more per night than most Manhattan apartments, was covered with his drawings: blue skies without clouds, houses with families holding hands, superheroes flying above skyscrapers. Images of a normal childhood he only knew on paper. Happy birthday, sunshine. Nurse Rebecca Wilson entered with a small cupcake topped with a single candle. Her Caribbean lilt always made Ethan smile, even on his worst days. Thanks, Nurse Becky. Ethan's voice was soft, conserving energy that was always in short supply. Your dad sent these. She gestured to a magnificent arrangement of balloons and the latest gaming console sitting on the side table. And he'll be visiting later. Ethan nodded, his face carefully blank. He'd learned not to expect too much. His father's visits were like eclipses, rare, brief, and always viewed through a filter. How about we set up this fancy machine while we wait for Dr. Anderson? Rebecca suggested, knowing that distraction was sometimes the best medicine. As Rebecca unpacked the gaming system, Ethan's thin fingers found the embroidered handkerchief tucked beneath his pillow. The delicate blue stitching had begun to fade, but he could still make out the initials SM in the corner. It was the last thing his mother had given him before her departure from their lives. He held it during chemotherapy sessions, during bone marrow biopsies, during nights when pain kept sleep at bay. Our talisman of courage when his own ran dry. Dr. Michael Anderson arrived an hour later, his white coat perfectly pressed and his smile genuine, but guarded. The birthday boy. How are we feeling today, Ethan? Okay, I guess. Ethan shrugged, his collarbones sharp beneath his hospital gown. Dr. Anderson reviewed the charts hanging at the foot of the bed. Your counts are a little lower than we'd like. We might need to adjust your treatment plan. Ethan nodded, used to the language of blood counts and treatment protocols. At 10, he understood his condition better than most adults. "Will my dad be here for that meeting?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Dr. Anderson and Rebecca exchanged a glance. "I spoke with him this morning," the doctor said carefully. "He knows we need to discuss some changes." What Dr. Anderson didn't say was that William Montgomery had been increasingly difficult to reach, that he preferred phone updates to face-to-face conversations, that he flinched whenever detailed medical information was shared, as if his son's illness was contagious through knowledge. "It's okay," Ethan said, reading their expressions. "He's busy." The day passed slowly. Ethan played with his new gaming system, ate a few bites of birthday cake that Rebecca had smuggled in, and dozed between medication doses. The steady stream of hospital staff wishing him happy birthday created a semblance of celebration, but by evening, his father still hadn't arrived. At 7, when the hospital corridors grew quieter and the night shift began, Ethan heard unfamiliar voices outside his door. "This is the children's visitation program I told you about," Rebecca was saying. "We pair community volunteers with our long-term patients. It makes such a difference." "I'd like to help," replied a young girl's voice. "My grandpa's just down the hall and I need something to do besides worry." "That's very thoughtful, Lily. Let me introduce you to someone special." The door opened and Rebecca entered with a girl about Ethan's age. She was small for 11, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that had clearly been worn by others before her. But it was her eyes that caught Ethan's attention, deep brown and filled with a quiet determination he recognized in himself. "Ethan, this is Lily Thompson. Her grandfather was admitted yesterday for heart problems, and she's volunteered to be part of our visitation program. Lily, this is Ethan Montgomery. It's his birthday," Rebecca added with a meaningful smile. "Happy birthday," Lily said, approaching his bed without the hesitation most visitors showed. No fear of his paleness, his thinness, the tubes and machines that had become extensions of his body. "I'm sorry I didn't bring a present." "That's okay," Ethan said, surprised by how normal his voice sounded. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to another kid. "I could tell you a story instead," Lily offered. "My grandma says stories are presents that don't cost anything but mean everything." Rebecca smiled. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted. I'll be at the nurse's station if you need anything, Ethan." After she left, an awkward silence filled the room. Ethan clutched his mother's handkerchief beneath the blanket. "Do you like dragons?" Lily asked suddenly. "Dragons?" "For the story. I could tell one about knights and castles, but dragon stories are better. Dragons can fly over everything, see everything, and if they want, they can make things better with magic fire." Ethan considered this. "I've never heard a dragon story before." "Really?" Lily's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Then you're missing out. My grandma taught me that stories help when things are hard." She glanced at the medical equipment surrounding his bed. "And it seems like things might be hard for you sometimes." Ethan felt something shift inside him, a curiosity, a spark of interest that had been dormant for too long. "I'd like to hear a dragon story." Lily settled into the chair beside his bed, the one usually occupied by doctors or rarely his father. She took a breath and began, "Once there was a dragon who was different from all other dragons. While they breathed fire that destroyed, he breathed fire that healed." Outside the room, William Montgomery arrived at the hospital 3 hours late for his promised visit. As he approached his son's door, he heard something he hadn't heard in years: Ethan's laughter, bright, uninhibited, and heartbreakingly familiar. William paused outside the door, his hand frozen on the handle. "I see." Sound of his son's laughter, so rare these days, made him hesitate to intrude. Through the small window in the door, he could see Ethan animated in conversation with a young girl he'd never seen before. For a moment, Will barely recognized his own child. The sickness that had claimed so much of Ethan seemed to have retreated, making way for the boy he once was. Before he could enter, Dr. Anderson approached from behind. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm glad you made it." The doctor's tone was professionally neutral, but Will caught the subtle reproach. "Board meeting ran late," Will muttered, turning away from the door. "Who's the girl with my son?" Lily Thompson, she's part of our new visitation program. Her grandfather was admitted yesterday with cardiac issues. Dr. Anderson glanced through the window, his expression softening. It's the first time I've seen Ethan engage so easily with someone his age. Will nodded, uncomfortable with the implications. Had his son been lonely all this time? Of course he had. The thought settled like a stone in his stomach. We need to discuss some changes to Ethan's treatment plan, Dr. Anderson continued. His latest blood work shows. Just tell me what needs to be done, Will interrupted, his eyes still on his laughing son. Whatever it costs, Dr. Anderson sighed. Mr. Montgomery, medicine isn't just about writing checks. Ethan's condition requires more than financial support. His psychological well-being impacts his physical recovery. Having you present, truly present. I'm here now, aren't I? Will's voice hardened. Yes, you are. Dr. Anderson handed him a folder. These are the proposed changes to his protocol. Review them and we can talk tomorrow. And Mr. Montgomery, perhaps wait a few minutes before interrupting. It's been a while since I've seen your son smile like that. Will watched the doctor leave, then turned back to the window. He couldn't bring himself to enter and break the spell. Instead, he placed Ethan's birthday gift, a rare first edition of The Little Prince he'd had his assistant track down, on the nurse's station counter with instructions to deliver it later. Then, he did what he always did when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. He retreated into work, pulling out his phone to check emails as he walked toward the elevator. Across town, in a tiny apartment above a bodega in Queens, Martha Thompson kneaded dough with practiced hands. At 67, her fingers were swollen with arthritis, but she worked through the pain, knowing the sweet breads and pastries she sold at the local farmers market were their primary income since George's retirement. The apartment was modest, but meticulously clean. Faded floral curtains framed windows that overlooked a busy street. Mismatched furniture had been arranged to maximize the limited space, and the walls were covered with framed photographs of Lily at various ages, school, portraits, holiday celebrations, moments of ordinary joy preserved with extraordinary care. Martha glanced at the clock, nearly 9, and still no call from the hospital. George had been admitted the previous day after collapsing at home, his heart condition worsening despite the medications. With no health insurance and limited Medicare coverage, Martha worried about the mounting bills almost as much as she worried about her husband. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. "Grandma? It's me." Lily's voice came through the old landline. "Lily, honey, how's Grandpa doing?" "Nurse Jenkins says he's stable. They're keeping him for observation, but his color is better." Lily paused. "Grandma, I met a boy here. His name is Ethan, and he's been sick for a long time. I told him some of our stories, and he really liked them." Martha smiled, dusting flour from her hands. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You've always been good at bringing sunshine to dark places. He has leukemia, Grandma. He's been in the hospital for years, and he doesn't have any friends. The nurse said I could visit him again tomorrow if it's okay with you." Martha felt her heart constrict. Since finding Lily as an infant, abandoned near the local dump wrapped in a dirty blanket, she and George had raised her with all the love they could provide, if not material wealth. They'd never legally adopted her, the process too expensive and complicated for elderly people with limited resources, but in every way that mattered, Lily was their granddaughter. "Of course you can visit him, honey. Just make sure you're not in the way of the medical staff." "I won't be." "Oh, Grandma, I have to go. Nurse Jenkins says visiting hours are ending. I'll see you tomorrow. Love you." "Love you too, sweet pea." As Martha hung up, she noticed her hands were trembling. George's hospitalization had stretched their meager savings to the breaking point. If he needed extended care or, God forbid, surgery, she didn't know how they would manage. The sweetbread business barely covered their rent and utilities. Their only luxury was Lily's education at the local public school, where Martha made sure she had everything required, even if it meant skipping meals herself. The next morning, Lily woke before dawn, as she did every day. She quietly prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal, leaving a portion warming for Martha. Then she packed her worn backpack with school books, carefully placing her most treasured possession, a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web that her third-grade teacher had given her, in the front pocket. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the old kitchen clock. Lily scribbled a note for her grandmother. "Gone to school. Will visit Grandpa after. Made oatmeal. Love you." She placed it beside Martha's reading glasses. The walk to school took 40 minutes, but Lily didn't mind. She used the time to observe the neighborhood coming to life. Shopkeepers raising their security gates, delivery trucks double-parked on narrow streets, early commuters hurrying toward subway entrances. She noticed details others missed: the changing leaves on street trees, the pattern of cracks in the sidewalk, the way sunlight filtered through buildings at different angles depending on the season. School was both a refuge and a challenge. Lily excelled academically, her natural intelligence sharpened by the work ethic Martha and George had instilled in her. But socially, she remained an outsider. Her clothes came from thrift shops, her lunch was always the same peanut butter sandwich, and she couldn't participate in after-school activities that required fees. Today, Ashley Miller, whose father owned a chain of electronics stores, blocked Lily's path to her desk. "Nice shoes, Lily. My mum donates stuff like that to homeless shelters." Ashley's friends giggled. Lily looked down at her scuffed sneakers, the duct tape on one side hiding a hole. "They work just fine," she replied evenly. "My grandpa says it's not what you wear that matters, but how you treat people." Ashley rolled her eyes. "Whatever. Where are you going after school? The dump to find more clothes?" The words stung, coming closer to the truth of Lily's origins than Ashley could know. But Lily held her head high. "I'm visiting my grandpa in the hospital, and then my friend Ethan." "I don't have friends," Ashley scoffed. "I do now," Lily said with quiet confidence, sliding past the other girl to her seat. Throughout the day, Lily found her thoughts drifting to Ethan. She'd stayed up late researching leukemia in her school, library's outdated medical encyclopedia, wanting to understand what he was facing. The technical terms confused her, but the basic reality was clear. Ethan's body was at war with itself. When the final bell rang, Lily rushed to the hospital, stopping only to gather a handful of wildflowers growing through a fence near the school. The hospital intimidated her, its towering glass structure so different from the humble buildings of her neighborhood, but she navigated the corridors with newfound familiarity. She visited George first, relieved to find him sitting up and arguing good-naturedly with a nurse about the hospital food. After promising to bring him some of Martha's sweet bread smuggled in her backpack, she made her way to the pediatric oncology floor. Nurse Rebecca greeted her with a warm smile. "Ethan's been asking about you all day. You made quite an impression." Is it okay if I visit him again?" "More than okay. Doctor's orders, actually. Dr. Anderson noted significant improvement in Ethan's vitals after your visit yesterday." Lily nodded solemnly, accepting this responsibility with the seriousness it deserved. When she entered Ethan's room, he was sitting up in bed, the book his father had left propped open on his lap. "You came back," he said, surprise and pleasure mingling in his voice. "I promised I would." Lily placed the wildflowers in a plastic cup on his bedside table. "I brought these for you, and I thought of a new story about a dragon who could change his size, from as big as a mountain to as small as a mouse, so he could go on adventures, everywhere." Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile he'd given anyone besides Nurse Rebecca in months. "I'd like to hear that. But first, will you read some of this with me? My dad left it yesterday." He held up, "The Little Prince. I've never read that one," Lily admitted. "Then we can discover it together," Ethan said, moving over slightly to make room for her to sit on the edge of the bed. As they began to read, taking turns with the pages, neither child noticed the tall figure watching from the hallway. William Montgomery stood transfixed, briefcase forgotten at his side, as he observed his son sharing a moment of genuine connection with a girl who had somehow accomplished what armies of specialists, experimental treatments, and his own faltering efforts had failed to do. She had brought Ethan back to life. Over the next 3 weeks, a routine developed. Every afternoon after school, Lily would visit her grandfather first, then spend 2 hours with Ethan. They finished The Little Prince. Together, both deeply moved by the story of friendship and loss, Ethan then introduced Lily to his collection of books, adventure stories, science encyclopedias, fantasy worlds that his father had purchased but never read with him. "This one's about space," Ethan explained, handing Lily a glossy hardcover with images of galaxies on the cover. "I want to be an astronaut someday." Lily took the book reverently. "You will be," she said with such conviction that Ethan almost believed it possible, despite the tubes connecting him to machines that beeped with the rhythm of his compromised life. "What do you want to be?" he asked. Lily considered the question seriously. No one had ever asked her about her future before. Survival had always been the primary concern in her household. "A doctor, I think, or maybe a teacher, something where I can help people." In exchange for the books, Lily shared her stories, each one improvised yet somehow perfectly crafted for Ethan's needs. She told tales of brave children who overcame impossible odds, of magical creatures who protected the vulnerable, of ordinary heroes who discovered extraordinary courage within themselves. Her most frequent character was a healing dragon whose special power was finding the unique strength in each person he met. "How do you come up with these?" Ethan asked one afternoon, his medical chart showing marginal but definite improvement since Lily had entered his life. "I don't know," she admitted. "The stories just come to me, like they're already there waiting. Grandma says I have an old soul." "What's that mean?" "That I've lived before, I guess. That I know things I shouldn't know yet," she shrugged. "Grandma has lots of sayings like that." Their friendship deepened in ways neither could articulate. For Ethan, Lily represented the normal world beyond hospital. Walls, a place of schoolyards and street games, of seasons changing without the mediation of window glass. For Lily, Ethan offered intellectual companionship she'd never found among her classmates, a mind as curious and thoughtful as her own. Dr. Anderson observed the relationship with professional interest and personal delight. "His blood counts are stabilizing," he reported to Nurse Rebecca as they reviewed Ethan's latest labs. "Nothing dramatic, but there's definite improvement." "It's the Lily effect," Rebecca replied with a smile. "That girl has magic in her." "The human connection is powerful medicine," Anderson agreed. "If only his father could see that." William Montgomery did see it, though not in the way the medical team hoped. His visits remained brief and awkward, but he began timing them to coincide with Lily's presence. He would stand in the doorway, watching the easy interaction between the children, feeling like an intruder in his son's life. The girl fascinated him, something in her animated expressions, the graceful movement of her hands as she told stories, the tilt of her head when she listened intently to Ethan. Something hauntingly familiar. One Thursday afternoon, Will arrived to find the children engaged in an impromptu art session. Lily had brought colored pencils from school, and they were drawing on the backs of Ethan's unused chart papers. "What are you creating?" Will asked, the question feeling foreign on his tongue. When had he last asked his son about something so ordinary? Ethan looked up, surprise flickering across his face at his father's interest. "I'm drawing our house the way I remember it. Before..." He trailed off. Before Sarah's illness. Before the hospital became his primary residence. Before the gulf between father and son had widened to its current unbridgeable distance. "And I'm drawing my neighborhood," Lily explained, holding up a detailed sketch of tenement buildings, the bodega below her apartment and a small community garden tucked between structures. Will studied her drawing, impressed by her attention to architectural detail. "You have talent," he said, meaning it. Lily beamed at the compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. My grandpa taught me to notice things, the shapes of buildings, the patterns in brickwork. He was a construction worker before he retired." "Was he?" Will's interest was genuine. Construction workers were the backbone of his empire, though he rarely interacted with them directly anymore. 42 years with the same company," Lily said proudly. "He helped build half the apartment buildings in Queens," he says, though Grandma says he exaggerates sometimes. Will smiled despite himself. The girl's forthright manner was refreshing after years of people carefully calculating their words, Around him, either fear of his power or, after Sarah's passing and Ethan's diagnosis, fear of triggering his grief. "And your parents?" he asked, curious about this child who had so profoundly affected his son. A shadow crossed Lily's face. "I don't have parents, just my grandparents. They found me when I was a baby and raised me as their own." "Found you?" Will's businessman. Instincts sharpened. "Near the local dump," Lily said matter-of-factly, though her voice lowered. "Someone left me there wrapped in a blanket. Grandma was collecting recyclables to sell when she heard me crying. They took me home and kept me, even though they didn't have much. Grandma says I was their miracle." Ethan reached for Lily's hand, a gesture of comfort that struck Will with its adult understanding. These children, forced to confront life's harshest realities far too young, had developed an emotional maturity that made him, with all his wealth and power, feel inadequate. "You were very fortunate," Will said finally, "to be found by people who would love you so completely." "I know," Lily agreed. "That's why I have to take care of them now that they're older. Grandpa's heart isn't good, and Grandma works too hard making sweet breads to sell at the market. When I grow up, I'll make sure they never have to worry about money again." The simple declaration of love and duty from this child of such limited means humbled Will. What had he been doing while his own son fought for his life? Building more towers, acquiring more properties, expanding an empire that suddenly seemed meaningless. "I should go," he said abruptly. "I have a meeting." Ethan's face fell, the familiar disappointment settling over his features. "Okay, Dad." Will hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed Ethan a small box. "I brought you something. It reminded me of those dragons in Lily's stories." Ethan opened the box to find a small jade dragon pendant on a silver chain. "It's beautiful," he breathed. "It's very old. It belonged to your great-grandmother." Will cleared his throat. "She always said it brought protection to whoever wore it." "Thank you," Ethan said, genuine gratitude in his voice. Will nodded awkwardly and turned to leave, but Lily's voice stopped him. "Mr. Montgomery, maybe you could stay a little longer? Ethan was going to show me how to play chess, but I'd learn. Better watching you two play first." The transparent attempt to extend his visit touched Will. "I suppose the meeting could wait," he said, surprising himself as much as Ethan. For the next hour, Will taught the basics of chess to both children. It was the longest continuous time he had spent with his son in years. As they played, Will found himself studying Lily, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she brushed hair from her forehead in a gesture so achingly familiar it made his chest tighten. When his phone finally buzzed with increasingly urgent messages from his office, Will reluctantly stood to leave. "Same time tomorrow?" asked Ethan. The hope that lit his son's face was worth more than any deal Will had ever closed. After Will left, Ethan turned to Lily with wide eyes. "He never stays that long, and he never asks to come back the next day." Lily smiled. "He loves you, Ethan. He just forgot how to show it." "How do you know?" "The way he looks at you when he thinks you can't see. Like you're the most precious thing in the world." That night, as Lily helped Martha prepare a simple dinner of rice and beans, she mentioned her growing friendship with Ethan and his father. "He's super rich, Grandma. Like, he builds skyscrapers and has his name on buildings. Downtown, but he seems sad all the time." Martha stirred the beans thoughtfully. "Money doesn't protect you from sorrow, child. Sometimes it just gives you bigger rooms to be lonely in." "Ethan says his mom passed away 5 years ago. That's when he got sick too." "Poor lamb," Martha murmured. "No wonder the father's lost. His way. Grief can blind a person to what's right in front of them." Across the city, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Will stood at the same window where he began each day. But tonight, instead of reviewing market projections or property portfolios, he held an old photograph in trembling hands. Sarah smiled back at him, her dark hair caught by a summer breeze, her eyes, those distinctive eyes, bright with joy, as she held 2-year-old Ethan on her hip. For the first time in years, Will allowed himself to really look at her face, to remember her laugh, her passion for life, her unwavering belief in his better nature. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath his ribs, but something else was emerging alongside it, a realization that in running from his grief, he had abandoned the living reminder of their love. And now, inexplicably, a child had appeared, in their lives with Sarah's eyes, Sarah's compassion, Sarah's gift for storytelling. A child found abandoned, rescued by strangers with kind hearts, but limited means. The coincidence seemed too great, the timing too perfect. Will reached for his phone and dialed a number he rarely used personally. "James, it's William Montgomery. I need you to look into something for me, discreetly." On the other end of the line, James Collins, a former detective who now handled sensitive investigations for Montgomery Developments, listened carefully to his employer's unusual request. "I need everything you can find on a girl named Lily Thompson. She lives in Queens with her grandparents, Martha and George Thompson. They found her abandoned as an infant, near a local dump about 11 years ago. I want to know everything. Medical records, any documentation of how she came into their care, background on the grandparents. May I ask why, Mr. Montgomery?" James had worked for Will long enough to speak freely. Will stared at Sarah's photograph. "Because I think she might be connected to my family in ways I can't explain yet, and I need to know the truth, whatever it is." James Collins had learned long ago that the wealthy lived by different rules. In his 20 years as a detective before joining Montgomery Development's security team, he'd seen how money could bend legal and ethical boundaries. But William Montgomery's request struck him as unusually personal. In their 5-year professional relationship, Will had never shown interest in anyone's background unless it directly affected a business deal. The investigation began with public records. George and Martha Thompson were exactly who they appeared to be, hard-working, honest people living modest lives. George had indeed worked construction for 4 decades, much of it for companies that competed with Montgomery Developments. Martha had been a school cafeteria worker until budget cuts eliminated her position, after which she'd started her small baking business. Their connection to Lily was more complicated. James found no adoption records, no birth certificate listing the Thompsons as guardians. Instead, he discovered hospital records from 11 years ago documenting the arrival of an abandoned newborn girl, brought in by an elderly couple who claimed to have found her. The hospital had followed protocol, reporting the case to Child Protective Services, but something had fallen through bureaucratic cracks. The Thompsons had somehow taken the baby home with only temporary emergency custody papers that were never formalized into legal adoption. It was highly irregular, but not unprecedented in an overloaded system. The child had found a loving home, the authorities had one less case to manage, and everyone had looked the other way. James compiled his findings, but held back from delivering them immediately. There was something about Montgomery's intensity on this matter that warranted discretion. Before making his report, he decided to observe the girl himself. On a crisp October morning, James positioned himself on a bench across from PS 118 in Queens, an unremarkable middle-aged man reading a newspaper. When school let out, he easily spotted Lily among the departing students, a small girl with a too-heavy backpack, walking with purpose while other children meandered or played. He followed at a distance as she made her way to New York Presbyterian, noting her confident navigation of the city's complex transit system, the respectful way she greeted hospital security, her careful washing of hands before entering the patient floors. What struck him most was how the hospital staff responded to her, with genuine warmth rather than professional courtesy. This child had clearly made an impression beyond her connection to the Montgomery heir. The next day, James expanded his investigation to include medical records. What he found, or rather didn't find, troubled him. There was no genetic screening, no detailed family medical history for Lily Thompson. For a child found abandoned, standard procedure would include testing for inheritable conditions that might affect her future health. The hospital had drawn blood, but the results weren't in her file. Another bureaucratic oversight or something else? As James prepared his report for Montgomery, a text message arrived from the man himself. "Meet me at the Pierre, room 1242. Discretion essential." The Pierre Hotel was an odd choice. Montgomery owned several properties where private meetings could be held. Why a hotel room? James's investigative instincts sharpened. When he arrived, William Montgomery wasn't alone. His cousin, Richard Montgomery, sat in an armchair by the window, his tailored suit and carefully styled hair a mirror image of Will's own executive appearance. The family resemblance was strong, though Richard was younger by several years and lacked the grief lines that had etched themselves into Will's face. "James," Will nodded. "Thank you for coming." Richard insisted on joining us when he heard about my inquiry. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Family matters concern me, especially when they might impact the company." James hesitated, suddenly uncertain about sharing his findings. "Mr. Montgomery, I thought this was a personal matter." "It is," Will confirmed, "but Richard believes it may have broader implications. Please share what you found." For the next 20 minutes, James detailed his investigation, watching both men carefully. Will's expression grew increasingly troubled, while Richard showed calculated interest. "So these people essentially kidnapped a child?" Richard asked when James finished. "That's an extreme characterization," James replied carefully. "They found an abandoned newborn and through a series of administrative oversights became her de facto guardians. By all accounts, they've provided a loving, stable home despite limited resources. But they have no legal right to her," Richard pressed. "Their temporary custody papers were never properly processed into formal adoption," James clarified. "However, after 11 years, the courts would likely consider the child's best interests before disrupting her current situation." "Unless a blood relative came forward," Richard suggested, glancing at Will. Will, who had been silent throughout. The exchange finally spoke. "What makes you think Lily is related to us?" Richard laughed without humor. "Come on, Will. I saw her yesterday at the hospital. The resemblance is uncanny. She could be Sarah's daughter." The words hung in the air, electric with implication. "That's impossible," Will said flatly. "Sarah couldn't have—" "Are you sure?" Richard interrupted. "You were traveling constantly during that last year, building the Tokyo project. Sarah was alone dealing with her diagnosis, facing her mortality. People make surprising choices in such circumstances." Will stood abruptly, his face flushing with anger. "My wife would never have hidden a child from me, and she certainly wouldn't have abandoned one." "Perhaps she didn't know what else to do," Richard suggested, his tone softening to one of false sympathy. "Her secret pregnancy, a terminal diagnosis, a husband always absent. She might have felt trapped." James watched the exchange with growing unease. Richard's theory was inflammatory and speculative, yet Will wasn't dismissing it outright. Was there something in the timeline that made this outlandish suggestion plausible? "I need to know for certain," Will said finally. "Can we get DNA testing without involving the Thompsons or Lily directly?" James frowned. "That would be ethically questionable and potentially illegal, Mr. Montgomery. The proper channel would be through the family court system, with full disclosure to all parties." "We don't have time for that," Richard interjected. "If this girl is a Montgomery, the press will have a field day once they catch wind of it. Billionaire's secret child found in dump isn't a headline any of us want to see." "This isn't about headlines," Will snapped. "It's about a child who may be connected to my family." "Our family," Richard corrected, "and our company. The board is already concerned about your emotional distractions since Ethan's relapse. If this becomes public before we control the narrative, your position as CEO could be compromised." The threat was thinly veiled, and James saw Will register it. For all his wealth and power, William Montgomery answered to a board of directors who could remove him if they deemed him a liability. "Give us a moment, James," Will said, his voice tight. James nodded and stepped into the hallway, troubled by the exchange. Through the door, he could hear the cousins' voices rising in what sounded like an increasingly heated argument. After several minutes, Will called him back in. "I've decided on a course of action," Will announced, his composure restored, but his eyes revealing inner turmoil. "I want you to continue your investigation, focusing now on any connection between Sarah and the Thompsons. Medical records, travel histories, phone logs from 11 to 12 years ago. Anything that might explain how a child with Montgomery features ended up in their care. And I'll handle the DNA question, Richard added. I have contacts who can manage this discreetly. James looked between the two men, seeing the power dynamic shift subtly in Richard's favor. Sir, I must advise against any methods that violate the child's privacy or rights. Noted, Will said curtly. But this situation requires extraordinary measures. If Lily is indeed related to us, I have a responsibility to her that supersedes normal protocols. As James left the hotel, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The Pierre, 1 hour, come alone. Information about Montgomery's situation. The cryptic message set off alarm bells, but his investigative instincts couldn't ignore it. An hour later, James found himself face-to-face with nurse Rebecca Wilson in the hotel's quiet lobby bar. I recognized you at the hospital yesterday, she explained, nervously turning a water glass between her fingers. Security pointed you out as Montgomery's man. You were watching Lily. I was, James admitted, seeing no point in denial. Why? What does William Montgomery want with that child? James considered his answer carefully. Mr. Montgomery is concerned about her welfare and curious about her background. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. He's never shown concern for any child except his own, and only sporadically at that. What's his real interest in Lily? I'm not at liberty to discuss my client's motivations. Then let me tell you mine, Rebecca leaned forward. I've watched that little girl bring Ethan Montgomery back from the brink when million-dollar treatments failed. She visits her grandfather daily, helps her grandmother with their struggling business, excels at school despite having none of the advantages money can buy. Whatever William Montgomery is planning, I won't let him disrupt her life out of some passing curiosity. Her protectiveness impressed James. What makes you think his interest would harm her? Because I've seen what happens when the powerful suddenly take interest in the vulnerable. It rarely ends well for the vulnerable. Rebecca sighed. Look, there's something you should know, something not in any official record. James raised an eyebrow, waiting. I was working the night Lily was brought in 11 years ago. I was a new nurse, just started in maternity. The Thompsons' story about finding her near the dump wasn't entirely accurate. She was left at the hospital's safe haven drop, but George Thompson witnessed who left her there. He followed the woman to make sure she was okay, said she seemed distraught, but she collapsed before reaching her car. He called for help, and by the time the ambulance arrived, the woman had passed away from what turned out to be a brain aneurysm. In the confusion, the baby was attributed to the Thompsons rather than the safe haven system. James felt a chill of recognition. This woman, do you know who she was? Rebecca shook her head. She had no identification. But George Thompson told me once that she was well dressed. Fancy was the word he used. The kind of person who didn't belong in that neighborhood. The hospital tried to identify her, but this was before security cameras were everywhere. She remained a Jane Doe. And no one ever looked for the baby? James asked, finding it hard to believe a newborn could simply disappear without questions. The assumption was that the mother had deliberately chosen anonymous surrender through the safe haven program. Those cases are handled differently. The focus is on getting the baby into the system quickly, not identifying the parents who've chosen anonymity. James absorbed this information, mentally recalibrating his investigation. Why are you telling me this now? Rebecca met his gaze directly. Because whatever Montgomery is looking for, the truth is more complicated than he knows, and because Lily deserves to be protected from becoming a pawn in some rich family's game. She's a child, not a corporate asset to be acquired or discarded. As James left the meeting, his phone rang. It was Will Montgomery. I need you at the hospital immediately. Will's voice was strained, urgent. Ethan's had a crisis, and James, Lily was with him when it happened. She's refusing to leave his side, and the doctors say her presence is stabilizing him somehow. I need to understand what's happening here. I'm on my way, James replied, hailing a taxi. And sir, I have new information about Lily's origins. Information that changes everything. The pediatric intensive care unit operated under different rules than the rest of the hospital. The usual visiting restrictions were suspended, when a child's condition became critical, allowing family to maintain a constant presence. This was why Lily, who was neither family nor old enough to be an official visitor without supervision, remained at Ethan's bedside despite hospital protocols. When James arrived, he found a scene that defied simple explanation. Ethan lay unconscious, his complexion ashen except for dark circles beneath his eyes. Multiple IV lines delivered medications and fluids, while monitors displayed his vital signs in glowing digital readouts. Lily sat beside him, her small hand holding his, speaking in a low, steady voice, not the frightened whispers of a child witnessing trauma, but the measured tones of someone providing comfort with absolute conviction. "You're stronger than this," she was saying. "Remember the dragon in our story? The one who thought his fire was gone forever but found it again when his friend needed him most? Your fire isn't gone, Ethan. It's still there. You just need to find it again." Will Montgomery stood at the foot of the bed, his normally commanding presence diminished by helplessness. When he noticed James, he stepped into the hallway, gesturing for the investigator to follow. "What happened?" James asked. Will ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Hemorrhage." His platelets dropped suddenly, they're still not sure why. He was reading with Lily when he started bleeding from his nose and mouth. She pressed the call button and then... He paused, struggling to articulate what he'd witnessed. The medical team says she kept him calm during the crisis, which prevented the bleeding from accelerating. Dr. Anderson says her presence is having some kind of physiological effect they can't explain. His vitals stabilize when she's near. James nodded, processing this information alongside what he'd learned from Nurse Rebecca. "Sir, about my investigation." "Not now," Will interrupted. "My only concern is Ethan." "This is relevant to your son's condition," James insisted. "The information I've gathered about Lily's origins might explain the connection between them." Will's attention sharpened. "What have you found?" James related Rebecca's account of Lily's arrival at the hospital, the safe haven drop, George. Thompson's intervention, the unidentified woman's collapse. With each detail, Will's expression shifted from skepticism to dawning recognition. "A brain aneurysm," he repeated when James finished. "And this was 11 years ago? In April?" "Yes, April 7th, according to the hospital records." Will leaned against the wall, suddenly unsteady. "Sarah was in New York that week. I was overseeing the Tokyo project opening. She'd told me she needed time alone to process her diagnosis, to make peace with it before starting treatment." His voice dropped to a whisper. "April 7th was the day she called to tell me her decision to begin aggressive chemotherapy. She sounded different, resolved. I assumed it was about facing her illness, but what if... Sir, are you suggesting Mrs. Montgomery might have been the woman who left Lily at the safe haven?" "I don't know what I'm suggesting," Will admitted. "It seems impossible. Sarah and I had been trying for a second child for years without success. Her doctors said the cancer treatments would eliminate any remaining possibility. There was no pregnancy, no baby. I would have known." "Unless she kept it from you," James said gently. "You mentioned being away frequently during that period." Will's face hardened. "I need to speak with George Thompson, immediately. Mr. Montgomery, consider your approach carefully. These people have raised Lily for 11 years with genuine love and care. Any suggestion of challenging their guardianship..." "I'm not looking to disrupt Lily's life," Will interrupted. "I just need to know the truth. If Sarah was connected to this child, if Lily is somehow related to us, to Ethan..." He left the thought unfinished, but James understood. The Montgomery family had already endured the loss of Sarah and now faced the potential loss of Ethan. The appearance of a child who might share their blood couldn't be coincidence. It felt like intervention, perhaps even salvation. "I'll arrange a meeting," James offered, "but George Thompson is still recovering from cardiac issues. We need to proceed with sensitivity." "Do it today," Will insisted. "And James, not a word to Richard about this development." The request confirmed James's growing suspicion that the cousins' interests had diverged. Will's concern seemed genuinely focused on understanding Lily's connection to his family, while Richard appeared more preoccupied with potential corporate implications. 3 hours later, James escorted Will to George Thompson's hospital room. The elderly man had been moved from cardiac intensive care to a standard room, where his condition could be monitored while he regained strength. Martha sat beside him, her hands busy with knitting needles that clicked softly in the quiet room. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," James began, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us. This is William Montgomery, Ethan's father." George straightened in his bed, recognition flashing across his weathered face. "You're the skyscraper fellow. Lily's been telling us about your boy." Martha set aside her knitting, studying Will with the shrewd assessment of a woman who had survived decades of hardship by accurately reading people's intentions. "Is Ethan doing any better? Lily's been at his side since the episode." "He's stabilized," Will said, finding himself unexpectedly moved by their immediate concern for his son, rather than curiosity about his presence in their room. "The doctors say Lily's helping him somehow." Martha nodded, as if this made perfect sense. That child has always had a healing way about her. Even as a baby, she seemed to know what people needed. Will glanced at James, then took a deep breath. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you were present when Lily was brought to the hospital as a newborn." The atmosphere in the room shifted. George and Martha exchanged a look laden with unspoken communication. "Who told you that?" George asked, his tone neither confirming nor denying. "I've been making inquiries about Lily's background," Willie admitted. "Not to cause problems for your family, but because I believe she may have a connection to mine." Martha's knitting needles stilled completely. "What kind of connection?" Will withdrew a photograph from his suit pocket, the same one James had seen him studying at the Pierre Hotel. "This was my late wife, Sarah. She passed away from cancer 5 years ago." George took the photo with trembling hands, adjusting his glasses to study it. His expression changed from puzzlement to shock. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. "George?" Martha prompted, leaning forward to see the image. Her hand flew to her mouth. "It can't be." "You recognize her?" Will said, a statement rather than a question. George nodded slowly. "She was the one who brought the baby to the hospital. I was there for a routine checkup. My heart's been troublesome for years, and I saw her pull up in a fancy car looking distressed. She was carrying a bundle wrapped in a blue blanket, moving like every step hurt. I followed her inside because I was worried she might collapse." "She went to the safe haven drop," Martha continued, picking up the thread of memory. "Left the baby there, then started back toward the parking lot. George saw her stagger and fall before she reached her car. By the time help came," her voice faltered. "She was gone," George finished. "Brain aneurysm," they said later. Nobody knew who she was. No ID, no phone. Just wedding and engagement rings and clothes that told you she came from money. "The baby was taken to maternity," Martha added. "And there was confusion. Someone thought we had brought her in. By the time they sorted it out, we'd already fallen in love with that tiny little girl. She had no one else, you see. No one claimed her." "They were going to put her in the system," George said, a protective edge entering his voice. "Foster care, then adoption if they found someone who wanted her. We offered to take her temporarily. Temporary became permanent, though we never could afford the legal process to make it official." Will listened to their account, emotions warring within him. If they were describing Sarah, and the timing, the medical event, the resemblance in the photo all suggested they were, then Lily was almost certainly his child. A daughter he never knew existed. A daughter Sarah had, for reasons he couldn't fathom, chosen to surrender anonymously rather than reveal to him. Why would she do this, he asked, more to himself than to the Thompsons. Why wouldn't she tell me about the pregnancy, about our child? Martha regarded him with unexpected compassion. "I can't speak to what was in her heart, Mr. Montgomery, but I've lived long enough to know that sometimes people make decisions out of love that look like abandonment from the outside." "The blue blanket," Will said suddenly. "Was there anything distinctive about it, any embroidery or pattern?" George frowned, searching his memory. "It was fancy, like hotel quality. Had some kind of design on one corner, I think. Monogram, Martha corrected. I remember because we kept it for Lily. It's the only thing she has from her birth mother. Letters SEM in blue thread. Will closed his eyes briefly. Sarah Elizabeth Montgomery. The blanket had been a wedding gift from his mother, a family heirloom restitched with Sarah's new initials. Where is this blanket now? He asked. Lily. Keeps it with her, Martha replied. She's very protective of it. Won't even let me wash it anymore, afraid the embroidery might fade more than it already has. Will nodded, a final piece of confirmation. I need to tell you something important, and I ask that you hear me out completely before responding. For the next 20 minutes, Will explained his theory, that Sarah had somehow concealed a pregnancy during his extended absence, perhaps initially planning to surprise him upon his return. That after receiving her cancer diagnosis, she had made the heartbreaking decision to ensure their second child would be cared for, rather than orphaned by her inevitable departure, and potentially neglected by a father consumed with grief and work. That she had chosen anonymous surrender as the cleanest break, only to be struck by an aneurysm immediately after, a complication no one could have predicted. I believe Lily is my daughter, he concluded, and Ethan's sister. The timing, the physical resemblance, the blanket, it all fits. And there's something else, something medical science can't explain, but that I've witnessed myself. Lily has a healing effect on Ethan. His doctors are amazed by how his condition improves in her presence. It's as if they're connected by blood, Martha finished softly. We've always felt Lily was meant for something special. That she came to us for a reason, but might not be ours to keep forever. I'm not here to take her from you, Will assured them, surprising himself with the truth of the statement. You've given her everything I couldn't. Stability, unconditional, love, moral guidance. You are her family in every way that matters. But you're her blood, George acknowledged, and that boy needs her. What are you proposing, Mr. Montgomery? Martha asked directly. Will hadn't planned beyond this conversation, hadn't allowed himself to consider what confirming his suspicions might mean for all their lives. But looking at these dignified, loving people who had rescued and raised his child when he hadn't even known she existed, the path forward suddenly became clear. I'm proposing we become one family, he said, not through legal maneuvers or custody, battles, but through choice. I want to buy a house near the hospital where Ethan can receive his treatments while living at home. I want to invite you and Lily to live there too, not as employees or charity cases, but as family. George could manage the gardens he's too proud to admit he misses since moving to an apartment. Martha could have a proper kitchen for her baking. Business. Lily could continue her schooling and visit Ethan whenever they both want, and I could learn how to be a father again, from two people who clearly excel at parenthood despite having few resources beyond love. The simplicity of the proposal hung in the air between them, its audacity matched only by its potential to heal four intersecting lives disrupted by circumstance. We'd need proof, George said finally. Not for our sake, but for Lily's. If she's to know you as her father, we need to be certain. DNA testing, Will agreed. Discreet but conclusive. And we'll only tell Lily if the results confirm what I believe to be true. And if they don't? Martha challenged. If this is all coincidence? Will considered the question seriously. Then I would still want to help the family that has done so much for my son. No strings, no expectations. Because regardless of biology, Lily has given Ethan something no amount of money could buy. A reason to fight. George and Martha exchanged another of their silent communications. A marriage's worth of understanding, passing between them without words. We'll need to think about it, Martha said. This is Lily's life we're discussing. Her future. We won't rush into anything, even something that seems miraculous. I understand, Will replied, standing to leave. Take whatever time you need, and thank you, not just for today, but for the past 11 years, for saving a child I didn't know I had. As Will and James left the hospital, a text message appeared. On Will's phone, board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Emergency session re your leadership. Richard requesting vote of no confidence. Vanessa. The battle for his company had begun. even as the battle for his family took an unexpected turn toward hope. The Montgomery Development's boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of their flagship building on Fifth Avenue. Floor to ceiling, windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan, a subtle reminder to everyone present of what William Montgomery had built from his father's modest construction company. The massive black marble table could seat 30, though today only the 12 board members, Will and Richard, were present. Will arrived deliberately last, a strategic choice to prevent Richard from cornering individual members before the meeting. As he entered, conversations hushed, and he felt the weight of 11 evaluating stares. Only Vanessa, his loyal assistant who had earned a board seat through 2 decades of brilliant financial stewardship, offered a supportive nod. "Good morning," Will said, taking his customary seat at the head of the table. "I understand this emergency session was called by Richard. Since my leadership is apparently in question, I'll turn the floor over to him immediately." Richard stood, buttoning his designer suit jacket with practiced precision. At 45, he had the polished appearance of someone who prioritized impression management over substance. Tailored suits, perfect hair, whitened teeth that appeared in frequent camera-ready smiles. "Thank you, Will. I've called this meeting with the deepest regret and only after considerable reflection. As both family and colleagues, we've all supported Will through tremendous personal challenges over the past 5 years. The loss of Sarah, Ethan's illness, the isolation that comes with such trials." Richard paused, his expression a masterclass in manufactured concern. "But we have a fiduciary responsibility to this company and its shareholders. Over the past month, Will's focus has demonstrably shifted away from critical business matters. The Shanghai project is weeks behind schedule. The Brooklyn waterfront acquisition has stalled. 3 major clients have expressed concerns about leadership continuity." He distributed folders to each board member. These documents outline specific performance metrics that have declined under Will's recent management, alongside a proposed transition plan that would elevate me to interim CEO while Will takes a sabbatical to address his personal matters. The room remained silent as board members reviewed the materials. Will made no move to defend himself immediately, instead observing which members lingered on which pages, noting whose expressions registered concern versus skepticism. "May I respond?" Will asked, when the rustling of papers subsided. "Of course," said Margaret Winters, the board's most senior member and a contemporary of Will's father. "That's why we're here." Will stood, but instead of moving to the presentation screen as expected, he remained at his seat, making his address personal rather than performative. "First, I want to acknowledge the truth in what Richard has presented. My attention has indeed been divided recently. My son's condition worsened significantly last month, requiring interventions that took precedence over business matters. I make no apology for that choice." He let his gaze move deliberately around the table. However, Richard's assessment contains critical omissions. The Shanghai project's delays stem primarily from regulatory changes in Chinese foreign investment laws, changes our legal team predicted and budgeted for. The Brooklyn waterfront acquisition pause was my direct decision after environmental assessments revealed contamination issues that would have created massive liability had we proceeded on schedule. Will opened his own folder, removing a single sheet of paper. "As for client concerns, I've spoken personally with each CEO Richard referenced. Their questions weren't about leadership continuity, but about our commitment to the environmental initiatives I championed last quarter, initiatives Richard vocally opposed in our strategy sessions." Richard's composure slipped momentarily. Those conversations weren't documented. They were recorded with permission, as is standard practice for all my client calls, Will countered smoothly. "Vanessa has the transcripts if anyone wishes to review them." Will finally moved to the presentation screen, bringing up a different set of metrics than those Richard had distributed. These figures tell a more complete story. Overall company performance has increased 7% year over year, despite market contraction in our sector. Employee retention has improved by 12%, reducing recruitment and training costs significantly. Our sustainability initiatives have generated Positive media coverage valued at approximately 20 million in equivalent advertising spend. He turned back to face the board directly. Yes, I've been distracted. Yes, I've delegated more than usual, but I've delegated to the exceptional team I've built over 15 years, a team that continues to perform admirably precisely because they don't require micromanagement. Margaret Winters removed her reading glasses. What about these personal matters Richard referenced? Are they resolved, or will they continue to demand your attention? The question was fair, asked without judgment. Will had always appreciated Margaret's directness. My son's health remains precarious, Will answered honestly, but we've discovered a treatment approach that shows remarkable promise. I've made arrangements that will allow me to balance my responsibilities more effectively moving forward, including relocating Ethan from the hospital to home care. And the girl? Richard interjected. The question caught Will off guard. Excuse me? The girl you've been investigating, Richard clarified, a hint of triumph in his voice. The one you believe might be Sarah's secret child. The board should know you've allocated company resources, specifically our head of security, to a personal matter that could create significant public relations complications. A murmur ran through the room. Will fixed Richard with a steady gaze, recognizing the trap his cousin had laid. Richard had timed this revelation perfectly, hoping to catch Will in either a lie or an admission that would paint him as emotionally compromised. James Collins works for me in both professional and personal capacities, Will replied evenly. His recent assignment was compensated from my personal accounts, not company funds. I'd be happy to provide those financial records. The issue isn't the money, Richard pressed. It's your judgment. You've become fixated on a child who bears a passing resemblance to Sarah, concocting elaborate theories about secret pregnancies and abandoned babies. This kind of magical thinking raises serious questions about your current state of mind. The boardroom fell silent. Will realized this was Richard's true strategy, not to prove financial impropriety, but to suggest psychological instability. A brilliant move, if breathtakingly cruel. Will took a moment before responding, gathering not just his thoughts but his conviction. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried easily in the hushed room. 11 years ago, while I was overseeing our Tokyo expansion, my wife made a decision I'm only beginning to understand. Facing a terminal diagnosis and knowing my workaholic tendencies, Sarah apparently chose to protect our second child, a daughter, by placing her in the care of others rather than leave her to a future of emotional neglect by a grief-stricken father. He moved back to his seat, sitting down to bring the conversation to a more intimate level. Through what can only be described as extraordinary circumstance, this child, now a remarkable 11-year-old girl, has come into Ethan's life as a hospital volunteer. Their connection was immediate and powerful. More significantly, her presence has coincided with measurable improvements in his condition that his doctors cannot explain through conventional medicine. Will looked directly at Margaret. I've met with the couple who raised her. I've seen the blanket with Sarah's monogram that was found with the baby. I've requested DNA testing, which is currently underway. This isn't magical thinking. It's a father following evidence that suggests his family may be larger than he knew. Even if true, Richard countered, this situation would create enormous complications. Legal, financial, public relations. The revelation of an illegitimate Montgomery heir would destabilize everything we've built. She wouldn't be illegitimate, Will corrected sharply. She would be the child of a loving marriage, born under circumstances none of us can fully comprehend yet, and she has a name, Lily. A name given to her by the couple who found her and raised her with more love and wisdom than I might have managed at that time in my life. He turned to address the entire board. As for complications, yes, they exist. Life is complicated. Business is complicated. We manage complexity every day in our professional decisions. Why should personal matters be any different? Margaret studied Will with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated generations of executives. What are you proposing specifically regarding your role with the company? I'm proposing balance, not abandonment, Will replied. I've already restructured my executive team to provide stronger autonomous leadership in each division. I've reduced my required presence at operational meetings by 30% while maintaining full engagement in strategic decision-making. I've implemented the succession planning this board has requested for years, though not with Richard as my immediate successor. The last comment elicited a barely concealed reaction from his cousin. Most importantly, Will continued, I've recognized that what makes me valuable to this company isn't my presence at every meeting or my signature on every document. It's my vision, my relationships with key partners, and my ability to inspire our team toward shared goals. None of that requires sacrificing my family, neither the son I've neglected for too long nor the daughter I'm just discovering. He stood again, concluding his defense. I'm not asking for special accommodation. I'm telling you that I've found a way forward that serves both my personal and professional responsibilities. If that approach doesn't align with the board's expectations, I'm prepared to accept your decision. But I won't apologize for putting my children first, and I won't pretend that doing so makes me less effective as a leader. In fact, I believe it makes me more human, more accessible, and ultimately more effective than I've been in years. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then Margaret Winters rose slowly from her seat. I move that this matter be decided by immediate vote, she said formally. The question before us is whether William Montgomery should continue as Chief Executive Officer of Montgomery Developments or be replaced on an interim basis by Richard Montgomery. A yes vote supports William's continued leadership. A no vote supports the transition proposed by Richard. Richard straightened, confidence evident in his posture. He had cultivated relationships with board members for years, positioning himself as the stable, drama-free alternative to his brilliant but emotionally complicated cousin. Those in favor of William Montgomery's continued leadership, please raise your hand, Margaret directed. Vanessa's hand shot up immediately. Two other hands followed more slowly. Will maintained a neutral expression, though his stomach tightened. 3 votes of 12 was a devastating rejection. Those opposed? Margaret continued. To Will's surprise, only 2 hands rose, Richard's and his longtime ally, Jonathan Pierce. Abstentions? The remaining 7 board members, including Margaret herself, raised their hands. The vote is 3 in favor, 2 opposed, 7 abstaining, Margaret announced. According to our bylaws, abstentions are not counted in determining majority. Therefore, with 3 of 5 counted votes being in favor, William Montgomery remains CEO of Montgomery Developments. Richard's face flushed with anger. 7 abstentions clearly indicates lack of confidence. It indicates reservations and a desire for more information, Margaret corrected firmly, which is precisely what I intend to propose next. William, this board requires monthly updates on both your personal situation as it affects the company and the specific operational improvements you've outlined today. We will reconvene in 30 days for a progress assessment and another vote if deemed necessary. She turned to Richard. Your concerns have merit and have been properly registered. However, your proposed solution is premature based on current performance metrics. I suggest you focus your considerable talents on addressing the actual business challenges you've identified rather than on management transition. The meeting adjourned shortly thereafter, board members filing out with the awkward energy that follows unresolved conflict. Richard departed without speaking to Will, his expression promising that the battle was far from over. Only Vanessa remained behind, waiting until the room had cleared. That was closer than it should have been, she observed. Will nodded, gathering his materials. Richard has been building toward this longer than I realized. My distraction gave him the opening he needed. What now? Now I prove that I can be both the father my children deserve and the leader this company needs. Will checked his watch. Starting with being on time for Ethan's treatment consultation. The house I mentioned is being prepared, a brownstone, near the hospital. The Thompsons have tentatively agreed to my proposal, pending DNA confirmation. Vanessa smiled. You've been busy. I've been motivated, Will corrected. For the first time in years, I'm fighting for something more meaningful than market share or architectural legacy. As they walked toward the elevator, Vanessa asked the question Will had been asking himself since meeting the Thompsons. Do you really think Sarah would have kept a pregnancy secret from you? It doesn't sound like the woman I knew. Will considered this as they descended toward the lobby. Sarah always protected me. From disappointment, from difficult emotions, from anything she thought might distract me from my ambitions. When she received her diagnosis, she tried to handle it alone for nearly 2 months before finally telling me. The elevator doors opened, and they crossed the marble expanse of the lobby toward the waiting town car. In her final months, Will continued, she made me promise to keep building, to continue the work she believed defined me. Her exact words were, "Don't let this family's legacy end with me." At the time, I thought she meant the company. Now I wonder if she was talking about something far more precious. As the car pulled away from the curb, Will's phone chimed with a text message. It was from James Collins. DNA results confirmed, 99.97% probability of paternal match. Congratulations, sir. You have a daughter. The brownstone on East 76th Street had stood for over a century, weathering the transformation of Manhattan from a gritty metropolis to a playground for the global elite. Its stone facade maintained the dignified restraint of old New York money, while the interior had been completely renovated to accommodate both modern luxury and medical necessity. 6 weeks after the board meeting, Will stood in the spacious kitchen, watching Martha Thompson expertly navigate between professional-grade appliances that had initially intimidated her. She moved with increasing confidence, rolling pastry dough for her signature sweetbreads, while consulting with Chef Tony Miller, a James Beard Award winner who had volunteered his services after hearing about the family's unique situation through hospital connections. "The secret is not overworking the dough," Martha explained, her gnarled hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate pastry. "You fancy chefs always want to show off technique, but sometimes the best technique is knowing when to stop." Chef Tony laughed, genuinely delighted by her straightforward instruction. "My culinary school professors said the same thing, but I had to pay $60,000 to hear it." In the adjacent dining room, George Thompson and James Collins bent over architectural drawings for the backyard garden. Though still recovering from his cardiac episode, George had thrown himself into transforming the modest city garden into a functional and beautiful space. "If we terrace this section," George suggested, pointing to the plans, "we could double the growing area for vegetables. Kids need fresh food when they're recovering, not just store-bought stuff." James nodded, making notes. His role had evolved from investigator to project manager for the brownstone renovation, a position that allowed him to witness the unusual blending of these two families. Through the French doors, Will could see Lily and Ethan in the garden. Though December had brought a light dusting of snow, Ethan had insisted on being outside, bundled in blankets in his wheelchair. His condition had stabilized enough for home care, though the journey toward recovery remained uncertain. What was certain was the positive effect of his new environment, and particularly Lily's constant presence. The children were deep in conversation, their heads bent together over a book. Watching them, Will felt the now familiar mixture of joy and regret that had become his constant companion. Joy at discovering his daughter, regret for the years lost, gratitude for the Thompsons who had raised her with such love. The transition hadn't been seamless. When Will had first shared the DNA results and his proposal, the Thompsons had been understandably cautious. Martha had voiced the central concern. What happens to Lily if we agree to this arrangement and then something changes? If you remarry or decide you don't want the complication, or if your company demands more attention? We've given her stability her whole life. We won't see that taken away. Will had responded by involving his legal team, not to assert his paternal rights, but to create a trust for Lily that guaranteed her education, housing, and future, regardless of any changes in his circumstances. He had also filed for legal adoption, while naming the Thompsons as permanent guardians with equal decision-making authority. The arrangement was unorthodox but reflected the reality. Lily had 3 parents, each with an essential role in her life. Telling Lily the truth had been the most daunting challenge. They had gathered in George's hospital room, Will, Martha, George and Lily, with James present for moral support. Will had explained as gently as possible what they believed had happened, showing Lily photographs of Sarah, sharing the DNA results in simplified terms, and emphasizing repeatedly that this revelation didn't need to change anything she didn't want changed. Lily had listened with remarkable composure, asking occasional clarifying questions that revealed her exceptional emotional intelligence. When Will finished, she had been quiet for several long moments before asking the question that pierced his heart. Did she, my birth mother, did she not want me? It was Martha who answered, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. She wanted you to be safe and loved, child. Sometimes the most loving choice a parent can make is to find the right people to care for their baby when they can't do it themselves. Lily had nodded, processing this. Then she turned to Will. And Ethan is really my brother, my actual blood brother? Yes, Will confirmed. Your half-brother. A smile had spread across her face then, not the polite smile she offered strangers, but the radiant expression Will had seen her direct toward Ethan. I always wanted a brother or sister, and now I have one who really needs me. The week since had been a careful dance of establishing new relationships while honoring existing ones. Will made no attempt to replace the Thompsons in Lily's heart, instead positioning himself as an additional support in her life. He attended her school conferences alongside Martha, funded the science club she was passionate about, and spent time simply listening to her stories and observations about the world. For their part, the Thompsons adjusted to their new circumstances with remarkable grace. George channeled his energy into the garden and household maintenance, finding purpose in creating a healing environment for Ethan. Martha transformed the professional kitchen from an intimidating space into the heart of the home, her baking business flourishing with Chef Tony's mentorship and Will's business connections. The most profound transformation, however, was in Ethan. Though still physically fragile, he had gained weight, color had returned to his face, and most significantly, he had begun planning for a future beyond his illness. With Lily's encouragement, he had started remote schooling, reconnecting with the academic interests that had been overshadowed by years of treatment. The siblings spent hours reading together, Ethan sharing his extensive book collection, while Lily introduced him to the imaginative worlds she created in her stories. Their favorite activity was collaborative storytelling. Lily would begin a Ihu tale and Ethan would continue it, each building on the other's creativity. Will often found himself pausing outside Ethan's room, listening to their voices rise and fall with the rhythm of narrative, marveling at how they instinctively understood each other's creative direction. On this particular December afternoon, as Will watched the children through the French doors, Dr. Anderson arrived for Ethan's weekly checkup. These visits had become less clinical and more conversational as Ethan's condition stabilized. "How's our patient today?" Dr. Anderson asked. Accepting the coffee Martha insisted on providing before any medical discussion could begin. "Stronger," Will replied. "He insisted on being outside today, even with the snow. 6 weeks ago, he wouldn't leave his bed." Dr. Anderson nodded, watching the children through the window. "I've been practicing medicine for 27 years, and I still can't explain what's happening here in purely scientific terms. Ethan's latest blood work shows improvement that exceeds anything we could expect from his treatment protocol alone." "Is it really so mysterious?" Martha asked, joining them with a plate of fresh pastries. "Those children share the same blood. They belong together." Dr. Anderson smiled at her straightforward wisdom. "Perhaps that's exactly it, Mrs. Thompson. We're only beginning to understand the physiological effects of emotional connection, how feeling loved and secure can impact everything from immune function to cellular regeneration." "You're saying love is medicine," Martha concluded. "The most powerful kind," the doctor agreed. "Though I'll still need to check his vitals and adjust his medication." As Dr. Anderson went to examine Ethan, bringing the children inside from the cold, Will's phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard Montgomery's name, the first contact since the contentious board meeting. Will hesitated, then answered. "Richard." "Will." His cousin's voice was carefully neutral. "I'm calling to inform you that I've accepted a position as CEO of Westridge Development Group. I'll be submitting my resignation from Montgomery Developments effective immediately." The news was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. Richard had been noticeably absent from executive meetings since the failed boardroom coup, his allies gradually realigning themselves as Will demonstrated his renewed commitment to the company. "Westridge is a good fit for your skills," Will replied. "Diplomatically, I wish you success there." A pause stretched between them. "The board seems satisfied with your performance these past weeks," Richard said finally. "Your new family arrangement appears to be working." "It is," Will confirmed, detecting something beyond professional courtesy in his cousin's tone, perhaps genuine curiosity about the unconventional household Will had created. "The girl, Lily, she's truly Sarah's daughter? Your daughter?" "Yes. DNA confirmed it beyond any doubt." Another pause. "And you've legally adopted her while allowing her elderly guardians to remain in her life. That's unusually generous." Will considered how to explain what had become clear to him over these weeks. "It's not generosity, Richard. It's recognition of what family really means. The Thompsons gave Lily everything when I didn't even know she existed. They're as much her parents as I am. And they've just accepted this arrangement? Living in your home, becoming part of your life?" "We're becoming part of each other's lives," Will corrected. "That's an important distinction. This isn't charity or obligation, it's redemption, maybe. A second chance to get right what I got wrong the first time." Richard was silent for so long that Will thought the connection might have dropped. Finally, his cousin spoke again, his voice stripped of its usual calculation. "Sarah would be proud of you. I should have said that at the board meeting. Whatever our professional differences, she would approve of what you're doing for these children, both of them." The unexpected sentiment caught Will off guard. "Thank you," he said simply. "I should go. I have a press conference announcing my new position." "Richard," Will said before his cousin could hang up, "our door is open if you'd like to meet your cousins sometime. Family is family, despite everything else." A final pause. "Perhaps after things settle. Goodbye, Will." As Will pocketed his phone, he felt a sense of closure. The professional rivalry that had dominated his relationship with Richard for decades seemed suddenly trivial compared to the relationships that now filled his home. Inside, Dr. Anderson had completed Ethan's examination and was sharing the results with the assembled family. Blood counts continuing to improve, platelet levels almost normal, white cell counts stabilizing. "It's not a complete remission yet, but we're seeing consistent progress in the right direction." Martha clutched George's hand, both of them beaming at the positive report. Chef Tony excused himself tactfully, promising to return for another cooking lesson with Martha the following week. James made notes on his tablet, already coordinating with the medical team about adjustments to Ethan's home care setup. Lily sat beside her brother on the examination table, her small hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Looking at them together, Will was struck anew by the miracle of their connection, how the daughter he never knew had become the salvation of the son he had nearly lost through neglect. "Dad," Ethan called, the word still new enough to send. A thrill through Will's heart. "Can we have the celebration now?" Will checked his watch. "Are you sure you're not too tired? Dr. Anderson said you should rest after examinations." "I'm fine," Ethan insisted, "and we've been planning this forever." Lily nodded eagerly. "We've practiced everything. It has to be today." Will looked to Dr. Anderson, who smiled indulgently. "I don't see why not. His vitals are stable and excitement is good medicine too." The celebration had been shrouded in secrecy, with Lily and Ethan working on their surprise project during quiet afternoons when they thought no one was paying attention. Will had respected their privacy, remembering how rare it was for children in difficult circumstances to experience the simple joy of creating a surprise for loved ones. "Let's move to the living room," Ethan suggested, already maneuvering his wheelchair in that direction. "Everyone needs to sit on the sofa." The adults obediently followed, settling themselves on the comfortable sectional that had been carefully selected to accommodate George's arthritic knees and Martha's petite frame while still meeting Will's aesthetic standards. The room had become a physical manifestation of their blended lives. Martha's handmade quilts draped over modern furniture, George's wood carvings displayed alongside Will's contemporary art collection, family photographs from both households, mingled on shelves and tables. Lily positioned herself and Ethan at the front of the room, both children vibrating with barely contained excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lily began with theatrical formality, "Ethan and I would like to present a special performance to celebrate our new family." "We wrote it together," Ethan added, proudly. "It's the story of how we all found each other." What followed was an extraordinary piece of collaborative storytelling. Lily and Ethan had created a modern fairy tale that incorporated elements of their actual experiences. A little boy confined to a tower by illness, a little girl raised by wise elders in a humble cottage, a distracted king who had lost his way, after the Queen's departure, and the magical discovery that the children were long-lost siblings whose reunion had healing powers. The tale was by turns heartbreaking and humorous, touching on grief and loneliness while celebrating the unexpected, joy of found family. They had clearly worked hard on the performance, taking turns narrating while acting out key scenes with simple props and expressive gestures. When they reached the conclusion, the creation of a new kind of kingdom where bloodlines and chosen family were equally honored, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even James, usually stoic and professional, was visibly moved. "That was beautiful," Martha said, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "You children have a gift for storytelling." "Indeed they do," George agreed gruffly, his weathered face softened with emotion. Will found himself unable to speak, overwhelmed by the children's perceptive retelling of their shared journey. They had captured not just the events, but the emotional truth beneath them, the loneliness each had experienced before finding each other, the healing power of their connection, and the unexpected joy of their blended family. "We have one more." "Surprise!" Ethan announced, wheeling himself to a side table where a wrapped package sat. "Lily, would you get it?" Lily retrieved the package and brought it to Will. "This is for you from both of us." Will carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a framed photograph. It showed Ethan and Lily sitting together on the garden bench, their resemblance to each other and to Sarah striking in the natural light. Around the photo, they had created a frame using what he recognized as Sarah's embroidered handkerchief, the one Ethan had kept under his pillow during hospital stays, his talisman of courage. The handkerchief had been carefully stretched and, mounted, its delicate blue monogram visible in one corner. Alongside it, in childish but careful stitching, someone had added the words "Our family" and the date. "Nurse Rebecca helped us with the sewing part," Lily explained, "but the idea was ours." "We thought Mom would want us all to be together," Ethan added softly. "This way she still is." Will traced the embroidery with gentle fingers, remembering how Sarah had carried this handkerchief everywhere during their courtship and early marriage. She had been the one who insisted on traditional touches like monogrammed linens, believing they connected modern lives to timeless values. "This is the most precious gift I've ever received," Will said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, both." Martha rose from her seat, moving toward the kitchen. "This calls for a proper celebration. I made a special cake for today, just in case the news was good." "I'll help," George offered, following his wife. As the Thompsons busied themselves in the kitchen, Will found himself alone with the children. Ethan had moved his wheelchair beside the sofa, and Lily perched on its arm, both looking at him expectantly. "You knew, didn't you?" Will asked. "You knew today's medical report would be positive." Lily smiled her mysterious smile, the one that made her seem far older than her 11 years. "We hoped, and hope is powerful medicine." "Almost as powerful as love," Ethan added, echoing Dr. Anderson's earlier observation with the innocent wisdom of a child who had experienced both the absence and presence of love in his young life. Will placed the framed gift carefully on the coffee table, then opened his arms. Without hesitation, both children moved into his embrace, Ethan leaving his wheelchair with the growing strength in his legs, Lily tucking herself against Will's side as if she'd been doing so her entire life. Holding them close, Will finally understood what Sarah had tried to tell him in their last conversation. "Don't let this family's legacy end with me," she had said. "Not the buildings that bore their name or the fortune they had amassed, but this, the love between parent and child, the connection that transcended even absence and separation, the healing power of belonging. Outside, snow began to fall more heavily, blanketing the garden in pristine white. Inside, the scent of Martha's baking filled the air as she and George returned with a cake adorned with candles. James discreetly took photographs, documenting this milestone for the family archives he had begun maintaining alongside his security duties. "Make a wish," Martha instructed as she set the cake before them. Ethan and Lily exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them, with the intuitive understanding of siblings who had found each other against impossible odds. "We already got our wish," Ethan said, looking around at the unlikely family gathered in the warmth of the brownstone. "But we can wish for something else," Lily suggested. "Something for all of us." Together, the children leaned forward and blew out the candles, their wishes unspoken, but somehow understood by everyone present. Wishes for continued healing, for the preservation of their newfound family, for the love that had found its way to them through paths none could have predicted. As they shared cake and laughter, the brownstone on East 76th Street ceased to be simply a house and became truly a home, not because of its address or amenities, but because within its walls two families had become one, bound together by the remarkable journey of a boy who needed healing and a girl who somehow knew how to provide it. On the mantelpiece, the framed handkerchief caught the light of the fire, its embroidered words speaking a truth that transcended circumstance. Our family. In those simple stitches lay the greatest legacy William Montgomery would ever create,